When it comes to resumes, I feel like maybe 10, 20 years down the road, they'll go away.
Andrew Seaman is the editor-at-large for jobs and career development at LinkedIn News. He creates and shares knowledge to help members and potential members get hired and advance. Where the world of resumes is going from your perspective, given the activity of plus 1 billion users on LinkedIn, how is this being factored in, and I'll just call it a very traditional element of your job search within the larger scope of all this change?
I'm sure there is a future where it doesn't exist, but for now, I think they still serve a purpose. A resume is very concise. It's, hey, I can do this job and I can do it well. Here's what you need to know about me. You want a recruiter to look at it, say, hey, this person looks great. And then the LinkedIn profile, it takes it a step farther. You can put more of your personality into it. You can sort of encapsulate a holistic view of your career there. They need to align, they need to tell similar stories, but the story they tell is more in depth on LinkedIn.
Warren Greif has spent a lifetime in corporate and executive search, calling bullshit on stale career advice that most still use. This is Career Blast in a Half, the career podcast for executives ready to cut past outdated career advice to fuel your outcomes now. So let's go.
All right. We are talking today about getting hired in 2025. And there is no better guest than bringing in Andrew Seaman, editor-at-large of careers, job-related issues on LinkedIn. I know what you're thinking. I follow him. I listen to him on Get Hired every week because I'm raising my hand. Maybe you can't see me, but I do. And I love to contribute to a lot of his thought leadership. Andrew also is going to give us a little bit of background, like how his so-called career path wasn't necessarily what you would think and why that matters in today's world. One of the hallmarks of what Andrew is here to talk about is how he was really steering his career, maybe not with, all the lights on at any given time, but the point is that he wasn't waiting, he was creating. And so, Andrew, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your willingness, and it's of course so much fun to turn the tables around.
Of course. No, thank you so much for having me, Lauren.
Absolutely. So, you have mentioned before that you had some, let's just say, less than promising ideas about your writing career.
Yes.
You didn't necessarily think you were good at grammar. And even to this day, it may not be your strong suit. You also talked about how you actually advocated to change your internship because there was a misalignment with some of your values.
Yes.
Help us understand, how does this all play into some of the tenets or principles that are happening and relevant in today's market?
Great question. Really good question. So my background is in traditional journalism. And I think when you are going for that purist form of journalism, and as an added bonus, I was also the chair of the ethics committee for the Society of Professional Journalists. So you become very, let's say, paranoid about how you're viewed externally. Because the point of really good journalism that is in the purest form is basically no one knows anything about you. They just hope that you are giving them the truth as it's known right then and there. And obviously there's a lot of different types of journalism. There's a lot of different types of media, but there's a role for all of them. So my thing was basically that, purist form. And essentially I wanted to craft something where I could have a long career in that field. And I think the biggest thing looking back now is that it takes time. Because, when you're in internships, and I did a lot of internships, you have to say okay, now is the time to sort of experiment and take chances. Intelligent risk, but, chances nonetheless. And that plus the time element really gets you to a point where you say, okay, this is where I'm heading. And then also saying, but I don't have to stay on this path forever. And I think that's sort of what's needed now, but maybe the time element needs to be a little bit faster than it was before because things are changing much faster than it did when I joined the labor market like 15 years ago. So I think being open to changing what you're doing, but also being very deliberate are really good elements of how to navigate this job market, but also having patience for what you want, but having the tolerance to change quickly.
Right. Like the days of our job searches being kind of like a very systematic, like, oh,
Yeah.
this box, do this, do that. It's becoming increasingly more complicated and complex, the whole entire system. And then we're not even talking about AI yet. So,
No.
so when you say it's needed more now, why is there call to action, or why is there some kind of seed that gets planted for having the clarity to maybe, cut bait and run, or hold on because this is a thing that you just have so much interest, passion, investment, whatever that is. When do you know when to do which one?
Yeah, I think there's a few different answers. And I think the first one is sometimes change is thrust upon you. It could be a layoff, it could be, a personal issue, something like that. And at the very least, I think that gives you an opportunity to review the path you're on and decide, do I keep going? Do I make a little bit of a pivot? Do I make a big pivot? And then there's also the times when you just don't feel fulfilled anymore. And when I started doing this work and writing and talking a lot about job searching and careers, I really realized that I needed to come up with some rules for myself, because the truth is that people work because they usually have to. They don't think beyond that. They're obviously, I think, work and careers play a much more complex and significant part of people's lives than they give it credit for. But at the foundational level, it's we got bills to pay and we need money. So we're going to do stuff for someone and they are going to give us money. And when it comes to figuring out, like, hey, what is that going to be? My truth is that work doesn't have to make you miserable.
Oh.
You don't have to love your job. You don't have to like it. But it shouldn't be something where you show up for weeks or months on end and you're just absolutely miserable. Maybe weeks, but definitely not months and definitely not years. And I think too many people did that, especially until maybe the 2000s.
Yeah.
Even in my own family, my dad hated his job, but he did it every day. And, I think there are other people who are like okay with their job, and that's okay. So my belief is that work doesn't have to make you miserable. Maybe it is making you miserable, but it doesn't have to. And because even if it's going to take months or a year or so, you can change what you're doing. You could pivot to something else. It's not easy, but there are paths to it. And then the other thing I also believe is that you get to dictate your relationship with work. So again, you don't need to love your job. You don't need to spend 40 hours there every, week, maybe, or not 40, but, 80 hours or whatever. You should be able to dictate, okay, when I leave at 5, I leave at 5. When I, want to put extra hours in, I put extra hours in. So I think people should believe they have much more autonomy than they give themselves credit for when it comes to those things. So if you are miserable in your job, if you just don't feel fulfilled by it, I think that's also a time to start exploring and say, okay, what else can I do? I'm not one for rash decisions. There are times, obviously, where that's called for. So, if you are really at the end of your mental rope or something, sometimes that is cause for, hey, I need to, hit the escape cord or something like that. But yeah, I think those two are probably the times when you really need to sort of review. It's when change is thrust upon you, or, you have that internal feeling of being unfulfilled, but also just sort of meh.
Absolutely. Sometimes I refer to that as the white knuckling it,
Yeah.
It's Wednesday and you're thinking to yourself, gosh, how can I, flip the clock to Friday? Because I just can't. Can't. I think we've all been there.
Oh, yeah. And like the thing too is like what I always tell people is like, listen, we're always going to have those weeks. Like at the end of the day, the best job in the world, you're going to have a bad week or a couple bad weeks or a few bad weeks, but you shouldn't have a few bad months, I don't think. And if you do, that's time to sort of step back and say, okay, how do I fix this? Do I have to jump ship? Can I change something internally?
So I want to talk about something that I don't particularly love, but it's what I refer to as a necessary evil, which is resumes. And for some reason, embedded in some other point in time, resumes became kind of like a magical talisman. Update my resume. Here's my resume. Pass on my resume. And I'm curious where the world of resumes is going from your perspective, given the just density, activity of plus 1 billion users on LinkedIn, where you see those two things, where they cross over, where, maybe given everything that has been talked about with respect to adaptability, right? Like the whole resume is it's literally like a puff of smoke. So how is this being factored in? And I'll just call it a very traditional element of your job search within the larger scope of all this change?
I think when it comes to resumes, I don't think they're going away or anywhere anytime soon. I'm sure there is a future where it doesn't exist. But for now, I think they still serve a purpose. And the way I sort of view this and the intersection with LinkedIn is a resume really is a very focused sort of shot across the bow of your career. Like, it is sort of the rules of engagement, kind of. You want a recruiter to look at it, say, hey, this person looks great. And then the LinkedIn profile, I always say it takes it a step farther, and you can put more of your personality into it. You can sort of encapsulate a holistic view of your career there. So they should tell the same story. So you shouldn't have a resume that says you're going for a program manager job, and then you have your LinkedIn profile that says you're looking for customer service roles. They need to align. They need to tell similar stories, but the story they tell is more in depth on LinkedIn. Because a resume is very concise. It's, hey, I can do this job and I could do it well. Here's what you need to know about me. And then when you go to the LinkedIn profile, it's like, oh, this person can write clearly. I could see that they keep up with information about the industry based on what they post. I see that they follow my company. I see that they have a lot of skills. They have recommendations. So it goes a little bit deeper. And then some people, they put their featured items up there. So, if you're a graphic designer, you can put some of your work up there. So I think they both still complement themselves very well. I think there are some people who solely do LinkedIn. And I think that's fine. Personally, I am a person who very much likes hard copies of things. So, even when I do a budget, there's obviously like a ton of different apps out there that will tell you, hey, this is a recurring expense I have. I can't visualize something unless I get it down on paper. So I think it's still a good exercise to create a resume to just make sure that you have your story correct. And then it's good to say like, okay, this is how I strip down all my experience for a resume, and then go over to LinkedIn and say, okay, how can I tell that same story, but emphasize it with like examples and, recommendations and appropriate skills. So I don't think they're going anywhere soon, but I feel like maybe 10, 20 years down the road, maybe.
I'm team LinkedIn. I am. And I think it's also because it's a much broader, you said, resume across the bow. LinkedIn is, I get more 360. I'm not going to say to the degree, but it's much, much, much more robust. Of course, I could also see who's connected to who. And also, believe me, I'm hip to this, but not everybody loves to write content. But if you are writing content, I can really understand your voice. And even if you're commenting, and please do that, even if you are commenting, I could also catch a flavor for some of the points of view that you feel particularly strong about, or even how you're elevating that conversation. So I feel like it's super, super, super dynamic. And just as a counterpoint, the resume is more like a courtesy.
Yeah, it really is. And actually, like, it's funny because the resume, it's the first resume, at least the person who gets credit for it is Leonardo da Vinci. Some people call it a cover letter because it was actually a letter to, I want to say, the Prince of Venice or something like that. I forget the specifics, but essentially he was saying, hey, here's my qualifications. I would like to work for you as, your chief architect of armament or something. I forget what position he was going for. But yeah, it essentially really hasn't changed. You can get all of that from LinkedIn. But like I said, personally, like, I think just the way I learn, it's like I need to do hard copy and then like get it up on digital. So
Yeah, the tactile thing has, I think, a mind connection. Like it's legit,
yeah,
right? It's like it's the real thing.
yeah,
All right. Let's talk a little bit about it's not actually like an elephant in the room because it is the room at this
yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
Right? The data shows, right, that AI is now involved in some place like around the area of like 65% of early stage recruitment processes. I guess what I'm really curious about is the balance between optimizing for compliance and finding remarkable talent.
Yeah.
So I was also just listening to the tail end of one of your other podcasts, which was talking about volume, talking about how volume and also the full open door policy to invite more volume in with
Yeah.
AI also starts to compromise some of the quality that lives in the system. So my question is like, what signals might decision makers, any of us, be missing with the rush of automation?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think so. The first thing is, like, for people who don't know, what you're alluding to is
Okay.
the fact that anyone could take a basic resume or basic story about themselves, plug it into one of the, hundreds of AI platforms that are out there or chatbots and say, I want to apply for a role in computer engineering at, a FANG company, and it will spit out something to, please you. And you can then take that and you could submit it. Unfortunately, there's just a lot of people doing that, and also not even going that far. They just take whatever resume they have and apply everywhere. And that's flooding a lot of employers with low quality candidates. And I get it. It's hard out there right now. Even though there's all these headlines that say, hey, it's a great job market, all this other stuff. It is. Like, there's not a ton of people out of work, but there's also not a lot of people leaving their jobs. So, and then you have all these businesses that are sort of like, hey, we went through this hiring boom and bust thing a couple times after the pandemic. We don't want to get into that. So it's sort of like, yeah, things are okay, but if you're not, if you're not an active job seeker, yeah, they are okay. But if you are a job seeker, it's really tough. So, you just see any position that you might like and submit it. And then you also have people who have basically decided they are never going to an office again. And what I'm hearing from a lot of people is that if they advertise for work from home positions, they just get flooded with everything. So like, whether you have expertise in it or not, people are just saying, I need a work from home job. And I see that a lot actually in people's comments when people talk about work from home. It could be something completely technical, something specialized. And you just have random people going like, oh, I'm only looking for a work from home job. And it's like, okay, but in what field? Like, there's no description. So you have all these employers that just have a flood of applications, and they're combing through all of these as best they can. And I think it does get to a point where they can't go through all of them physically. They try, like, when people sometimes, they always, especially on my podcast, I get the worst reviews when I talk about recruiters and then going through actual applications because people don't believe that. And somehow they think big recruiting is like paying me to stick up for them, which is kind of funny. But yeah, so obviously these employers, these companies have to deploy their own technology now to go through them. So, what's funny is everyone's terrified that applicant tracking systems and computers weed out, low quality candidates. And that really wasn't true. There was some sorting abilities that applicant tracking systems had, but for the most part, recruiters were going through your applications. But we're at this moment now that I don't know if that's going to be true much longer because, companies need help.
Crescendo of,
Yeah.
of
And
density.
Yeah, so when I do say, and I always encourage this quality over quantity, it is really key. So even internally, we just launched something yesterday where it helps people match, like they could basically look at a job if they have LinkedIn Premium, and it'll say, okay, we think you're a good match for this. So it's not the top applicant thing people see, but it's literally, hey, you don't have this, you don't have this,
Mm.
you should address this, or maybe you want to look for something else. I've played around with it a little bit. And again, I'm not here to sell anyone on LinkedIn, but that's literally one of the purposes, is to help people like, hey, maybe don't apply to this. Like,
Oh,
uh,
that's right.
yeah,
A little discernment.
yeah. And so I think on both sides, it's just this weird vicious cycle where it's like AI enables people to apply to everything and anything, and the employer side just has to sort of beef up their technology in response to that. So I think when it comes to that, obviously there's a lot of regulations on the employer side. On the applicant side, I think it's still, you have to focus on quality more than anything. Like, I don't waste your time or your energy applying to things that just aren't a fit. Like, what I always tell people, like, can you do the job? Can you do it well? That is sort of like the barrier to entry. And then on the employer side, unfortunately, I think it's just, I don't think they are going to do it smartly, but also I think we will get to a spot where what people fear about applicant tracking systems do become true, because I don't see any way around that if people don't start being more selective in what they apply for.
Yeah, it's a big it. I think that even though it's a very deliberate action, it comes with a lot of other signals that say I'm doing something, or maybe just this, maybe, the luck of the draw is going to fall. Hey, you never know.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of kind of old behavior, be even in just thinking that that's more is going to equal, dream job or the outcome that I'm looking for. So
Yeah.
I'm really, really grateful that you were talking about this, because I think that we all need more than one point of entry to wherever it is that we are going, especially with the tonnage. I would be negligent and remiss if I didn't ask you, and I know that you've been covering this, so thank you again, talking about older workers.
Mm-hmm.
We are now in a place where many, many, many of the large enterprise companies have been rolling back DE&I. We saw it the other day. Thank you, Apple. Thank you, Costco, for holding on to your ethics and your morals. I'm just going to say that. And from the last that I checked, about 3% of the overall LinkedIn population was over 55. And I am curious, as part of the incredible mission of unifying people and making sure that it's a democratized platform, if there are any other up and coming either features outside of maybe some of the learning classes where there is an invitation to bring some of the more mature workers and that sense of inclusivity, because word up, there oftentimes, and in fact, it was covered in a Business Insider article just last week, which I did reach out to, and said, the new rules for 2025 for anybody over 40 is to hide your age. And so it's hard to have a multi-generational workforce when there's another message about it being either shameful or an old idea, or, a perception around what that means. And I'm curious, what your thoughts are, and how LinkedIn might be approaching this topic.
Yes, it's a great question. The first thing I should say is a small disclaimer. I don't know a lot about products and development.
Sure.
I usually learn about things like right before we launch them.
Of course.
Mostly just because like there's a lot of different projects that happen around LinkedIn, and I'll know, like I'll read about some things and I'll be like, oh, that's cool. And then it might change hands or whatever. So a lot of times I don't pay attention to stuff until it's like ready for prime time. Honestly, I think, I cover the space a lot because I really do believe that the world of work has changed so much. Like, even just, when I was in high school, I had this absolutely wonderful business teacher, Mrs. Wenger, who I think was probably in her 70s when I had her, but she taught career stuff. And, so you think back, it's like, I absolutely loved her class, but she was teaching me things that she had learned decades ago. And this was decades ago that I learned it. So, and especially when you get into Gen X and like baby boomers, just the world of work has changed so much. And you think about, people whose parents were in the workforce for a long time, like my parents, the mantra was you get a job that pays a decent enough amount that you can cover your family's expenses, and you stay there until you die or they kick you out. Like that was the mantra. And they're both retired now, but that's, again, when I alluded to my dad doing a job that he really didn't like, I think it was because, like, listen, I have a job. I'm just going to stay there. And so I think a lot of it is about education, about navigating the world of work in terms of like how to do it and how often to do it, because sadly I think we're getting to a point where it's just not possible to work for a place for decades anymore. I don't know if that even exists now, but I don't think people, especially like older millennials and beyond, that were taught how to navigate that. And then I think, obviously, like you alluded, the DEI stuff is also like a variable in there, because what does that mean? And I think we are at this weird inflection point where companies don't like, it's almost like the bias isn't really sure of, does it lean more toward younger applicants or older applicants? Because historically, when it came to layoffs, it was for last in, first out. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic switched that. There is or at least there used to be, I don't know if they're still active, but the New School here in New York, the School of Economics had this think tank that was focused on older workers and retirement. And what they found is basically during the pandemic, it was the first recession that we knew of where older workers were actually culled first from the employee rosters. So I don't know if there's anything that can be done outside of regulation or things like that to address that on the employer side, but at least from the applicant and job seeker side, I think it's mostly about education, about, you really do have to keep your options open. You have to keep your name out there. And even, for people who are at or nearing retirement, are you secure? Do you have to keep up things there? Because, even in our data, we saw people come back from retirement recently, probably because of inflation. So yeah, so I think a lot of it does come just down to education about how to navigate the labor market that we're in, the job market. And I know that's not a perfect answer, but
no, there is no perfect answer. And I mean, I think that you actually raise kind of the bigger issue, which is that navigating the labor market could be navigating your career, navigating the hiring market, navigating even your upskilling and or other more technical skills. All of that in many ways, as close as we are to it, can be new for a lot of people, because what has happened up until now historically is maybe they just got plucked from one position to another.
Yeah.
So that impetus, as you said earlier, right? Sometimes it falls upon you and sometimes it doesn't. And so it's hard to stay prepared when there's a constant level of change and really know that it's a thing. It's a real thing. It's a real thing.
And even now, like one of the things, we do big ideas every year on the LinkedIn News team, and I did a special edition for work. And one of the things that I put in there that I've just been thinking a lot about over the past year or so is like the death of the full-time job, because I just see so many people across so many different industries that are contractors now. Mm-hmm. So like, it's not new to tech, obviously. Tech always had a lot of contractors. The media world had a lot of contractors. But then I'm talking to people who are in retail, who are, in consulting and stuff, and they're doing a lot of contract work. And I think especially as the labor market and just technology changes so quickly, we're going to see more people lean into the idea that, hey, I don't need to hire a full-time person. That's a huge investment, because when you look at most companies or businesses, their biggest expense is their staffing. They could cut a lot of that out by doing contract work and saving full-time positions for core functions. And so it's like one of those things where I'm like, I wonder what's going to happen kind of after the next 2 years. Like, are we going to see more of a drive toward contract work? Are we going to see sort of the resurgence of full-time? Because there is data on this from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it does change. Like, was a time when there was more temporary workers than full-time workers, like I believe in the early 2000s or whatever. But we're also in a different labor market and technological world. So it's hard to judge, but it'll be interesting, like in a couple of years, to look back and say, like, okay, was that like a turning point or was that a blip?
Yeah, I know. Every day is another cliffhanger.
Yes.
It literally is, because you never know what you're going to wake up to. And there are so many factors. Obviously, you touched on, 4-day work week or even remote. So many companies are back to work or, return to the office. And some people think that is also a little bit of a bait and switch for all the real estate the last thing I really want to talk to you about is learning development, upskilling, reskilling. And this is one that's real near and dear to my heart, because so many companies, as you also touched on, are investing heavily in their employees. They are making sure that all those great people that they hired, that they are supporting them, making sure that they have the skills that they need, both soft and hard skills. But the question is, if you aren't working and you want to be working, where does that upskilling happen? Where is the both responsibility and the places that we as people in the marketplace want to say, hey, guess what? No joke. Like, this is for real, and send them to?
Yeah. So I think there's a few different places, like, especially if you're looking for technological skills. Pretty much every major tech company has certificates and things like that you can take part of. Even if companies that you wouldn't maybe expect, like I know Cisco has a very large training program, because Cisco has a lot of customers that use Cisco equipment and they need people who can fix Cisco equipment. So they have like a training program that you go through, that you get a certificate, and then you get connected with one of their clients to be like, hey, this client in your area needs an IT person to assist with their Cisco systems. There's a lot at community colleges that I think are really good. It's always, what I tell people is, like, when you look around, it's actually kind of surprising how many upskilling opportunities there are. You just kind of have to look for them. One place I always suggest looking is at your local job center. So there's obviously USA job centers that are somewhat funded through the Department of Labor in the United States. But a lot of times there's like senior centers, there could be community centers where they have people check the bulletin boards. Bulletin boards are still used. So there are usually flyers there. There's usually people within your area that keep a pulse on that. And I think for people in the marketplace, that's always good to check out. And that's even good for people who maybe don't know what they want to do, because when you see those different opportunities laid out in front of you, you could say, oh, that is interesting. I'm genuinely curious about that. And you can follow that a little deeper. And then obviously there's a lot of online resources, like LinkedIn Learning makes a lot of courses free you could follow their blog and different things like that. So, and especially whenever there's a big moment, like we just released Jobs on the Rise, I think unlocked hundreds of courses, I think, tied to that. I could be wrong, but we definitely we unlocked a lot of courses for free for a little while. So those are always up there. But yeah, upskilling is so crucial. And what I usually tell people, because I try and do online learning periodically, whether it's free courses from MIT or something, which you can find, every Ivy League school has basically free courses that they make available online. And it might be mind numbing and I might not enjoy it, but I feel like it's good for me to know that information, even if it's at surface level, terms and things like that. But then what you could do is complement that with a course that you like. And I think back to college where it was okay, yes, I'm going to take the environmental science course, even though yes, I like the environment, but I don't want to learn, I don't want to learn the nitty gritty.
Science. You were going to be like, that's your
That's true. I did want to be, a long time ago, I wanted to be a science, but environmental science was never like I never was drawn to that, but I do care about the earth and all that stuff. But then you include oh, I want to do pottery or something like that. You always had those courses that you genuinely looked forward to, or even in high school, some people like gym. I didn't, but that's what people they were ooh, we have gym this today or something. So I always like to compliment, if you're doing a course or you're learning something that maybe is a little bit more intense or something, make time to deliberately sort of enjoy yourself, because otherwise it can get stressful and you can sort of start hating your career, even if it's this little portion that you're just learning. It's good to have that fun stuff in there.
But the point that I'm really walking away with here is it's pervasive. It's everywhere. You don't have to look that far to find them. And a majority are free. They are encouraging all of us to, get excited about learning. I mean, I don't really know anything that is even more exciting than getting geeked up about something that you're interested in, or even supplanting, new ideas for things that you're going to be able to repurpose in a job, or, an internship, or who knows, maybe your own business or a gig opportunity as well.
Totally. And what I always remind people too is companies, I always say, are selfish. They're not doing these things for altruistic reasons most of the time. In this case, technology is evolving much faster than our education systems are. Mm-hmm. And what I always tell people is if you think about it, yes, every year there's a new class of people that start college or start grad school or start high school or whatever. But I said, that doesn't mean they're rewriting the curriculum every year. So by the time they do that, it takes a while for people to sort of work their way through the system. And because technology is evolving so quickly, there are large skills gaps within our labor force. So it is crucial that companies sort of fill the gap and say, hey, we have this computer system that needs special attention, and we are here to train people for it. So those opportunities are out there because basically companies need to put them out there.
That is such a good point. I never even thought of it. It could even be considered like a pipeline for recruiting arm for sure.
Yeah. And actually a lot of the big tech companies do that. Like Google certificates, I think there's a component where it might be Google. There's so many of them that I actually get them jumbled in my head. Like Amazon has them, things like that. And there's sometimes community college components where if you go through that course, they will supplement or cover the cost and, things like that. But then at the end of it, as long as you pass and all of that, they will connect you with their clients, or they will get you into some sort of career system where it's not necessarily a guaranteed job, but it's definitely a leg up in the job search.
Sure. Amazing. And honestly, it's just really, really great to meet you, see you, not in a little box or anything like that, and hear you be 100% yourself and give so much away in terms of your, points of views and thinkings and spins. You sit in a very unique spot, and it's great. I mean, it's fantastic. And it's also great to just hear a little bit of it, somewhat off the record, and see and get to know you. And thank you. Thank you so much for coming here. And thank you, everybody, for listening. You had such a special treat, and we're so excited. Thank you for listening. And also, if you did enjoy this, please go ahead, subscribe, and please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We would love that because we're growing, and we are here to serve and bring you all of the career advice that is relevant and no more of that outdated stuff so that you can win. All right, thanks.
Thank you for joining today. We appreciate your listening ears. Big time. We ask this: use these tools, not tomorrow, right now, and share them by spreading the love, leaving us a rating and subscribe so you don't miss the next Career Blast in a Half. Most of all, thank you for you.